We've had like 30 founders debanked in the last 4 years.
Really?
Yeah. It's been a big recurring pattern.
30.
Here is Andreessen on Rogan talking about how the U.S. government forces banks to debank right-wing people.
Here's a great thing. Under current banking regulations, after all the reforms of the last 20 years, there's now a category called a politically exposed person, PEP. And if you are a PEP, you are required by financial regulators to kick them off of to kick them out of your bank.
What?
You're not allowed to
But
have
what if you're politically on the left?
Well, that's fine.
No.
because they're not politically exposed.
So no one on the left gets debanked?
I have not heard of a single instance of anybody on the left getting debanked.
Could you tell me what the person that you know did, what they said that got them debanked?
Oh, well, I mean, David Horowitz is a right wing. He's pro-Trump. I mean, he's said all kinds of things. He's been very anti-Islamic terrorism. He's been very worried about migration, all these things.
And they debanked him for that.
Yeah, they debanked it. So you get kicked out of your bank account. You get kicked out of you can't do credit card transactions. By the way, you can't.
How is that legal?
Well, exactly. So this is the thing, and then you go into this thing of like, well, this is where the government and the companies get intertwined. Back to your fascism point, which is there's a constitutional amendment that says the government can't restrict your speech, but there's no constitutional amendment that says the government can't debank you, right? And so if they can't do the one thing, they do the other thing, and then they don't have to debank you. They just have to put pressure on the private company banks to do it, and then the private company banks do it because they're expected to. But the government gets to say, we didn't do it. It was the private company that did it, and of course, J.P. Morgan can decide who they want to have as customers, of course, right? Because they're a private company, and so it's this sleight of hand that happens. So it's basically a privatized sanctions regime that lets bureaucrats do to American citizens the same thing that we do to Iran. As marijuana started to become legal, as prostitution started to become legal, and then guns, which there's always a fight about. Under the Obama administration, they started to debank legal marijuana businesses, escort businesses, and then gun shops, just like your gun manufacturers, and just like you're done, you're out of the banking system. And so if you're running a medical marijuana dispensary in 2012, guess what? You're doing your business all in cash because you literally can't get a bank account. You can't get a Visa terminal. You can't process transactions. You can't do payroll. You can't do direct deposit. You can't get insurance. Like none of that stuff is, you've been sanctioned, right? None of that stuff is available. And then this administration extended that concept to apply it to tech founders, crypto founders, and then just generally political opponents. So that's been like super pernicious.
I wasn't aware of that.
Oh, 100%. And this is called, so it was Operation Choke Point 1.0 was 15 years ago against the pot and the guns. Choke Point 2.0 is primarily against their political enemies and then to their disfavored tech startups. And it's hit the tech world like we've had like 30 founders debanked in the last 4 years.
Really?
Yeah. It's been a big recurring pattern.
30.
But this is one of the reasons why we ended up supporting Trump. It's like we can't live in this world. We can't live in a world where somebody starts a company that's a completely legal thing and then they literally get sanctioned.
All right, so everything Andreessen said there is true. People have been trying to fact check him on Twitter because it sounds so crazy. It's also interesting to me that Rogan seems to have had no idea that any of this was going on. I mean, we know it was going on. Actually, David Horowitz Freedom Center, which was his nonprofit, I used to do events for them. And then a couple of years ago, he asked me to do the event. And I was like, all right, I'll even waive, because I like him. I really like him. He was one of the original Why I Left the Left guys. He's been on the show a couple of times. And I was like, I won't even take a speaking fee, just pay for me to fly out there. Is when I lived in LA, and I think they were doing it in West Palm. I was like, just pay for me to fly out there. He's like, we can't, because we can't even get money into our accounts anymore. And then I was going to do it anyway, and then I just couldn't because of a schedule conflict. But the point is, this has been going on for quite some time. I really like the phrase that Andreessen said there, which is privatized economic sanctions. So the government is like, oh, we can't take out these people, but we can basically just push them out of society. They have political views we don't like. Well, they do have the First Amendment, and we'll have to work around that eventually. But we can just make sure that they can't do business, and most people like doing business. Most people like owning a home and owning a car and getting a loan. So we'll just push them out of the system altogether. Now, ironically, this has also driven the rise of crypto, obviously, because it's outside of the system. So there's always a better mousetrap to be had. But I thought that was good. And by the way, didn't it all sound exactly like the arguments that have been made over the last couple of years around big tech? That the government knew during COVID it couldn't come in and basically arrest you for being anti-lockdown or anti-vax or whatever. But what could they do? Oh, they could put certain pressures on big tech companies like the old regime at Twitter, et cetera, to make sure that if you tweeted something out that was counter to the narrative, that you would be deboosted, not debanked, but deboosted, et cetera, et cetera.